Chapter 193. "This is Lexi," said Torsten Klein, the wanted poster behind him expanding to show the Meister. The video clip started to play, and the four volunteers saw a chain extend and bend in an S shape to slice two different incoming tennis balls in half. "Wonderful student. He's dedicated, takes instruction well, asks thoughtful questions after reviewing his footage. So much praise. You didn't have anything to say about Hoyu?" "He probably didn't say anything about Hoyu because you talked about him for 3 minutes straight," Hale Zhangdemir said to her husband. There was nothing left to cover. Hoyu's father laughed and waved Torsten on. "Tell us about Lexi. How's he doing now that he finally made it here?" "Well, from the looks of it." Aparna Sethi wore an interested expression on her face. "I know Meisters have an advantage in combat, especially these young ones. I told my Ignacio he'd be cheating with those knives of his. But that's impressive, and I think I've seen that weapon before." "Then you're in rare company," said Torsten. "Lexi is only the second known Meister with a mind breather. The first was an unregistered who died decades ago after causing some trouble with his. You might remember it from new weapon reports released back in the day?" Aparna nodded. "It's harder to keep track now, with so many more exotic options being given to our Meisters. Back then, anything that didn't closely resemble human weaponry stood out more and caused a stir. This one caused a stir among the faculty. It's got very obvious potential. He can cut the car in half with it and thread a needle, theoretically at the same time. And it gets hot, sometimes randomly." One of the tennis balls on the video was smoking. Fittingly for a whip-like weapon, it's capable of supersonic speeds. That's part of the trouble with it. For us and for Lexi. It's overly responsive to him, in a way. Even his idle thoughts, or his moods, seem to change its motion. When he's consciously controlling it, it's actually much easier to fight him. Slower. More predictable. As he switches from conscious control to a more spontaneous, reflexive state in the heat of a fight, things get more interesting. The clip shifted to a new one, showing Lexi in a duel against Diet. "This is a fast enough reaction to deal with anyone in the current class," said Torsten, as he zoomed in to show the whip slicing a dart out of the air, its tip already coiling toward another one and just missing. If that first dart hadn't been a decoy, Lexi might not have lost this fight. However, he can't respond as quickly deliberately. "Poor Lexi," said Hale. "I'm sure that frustrates him to death. He's not someone who enjoys being out of control." "He'll get there," Klein said confidently. "We'll get him there. For now, though, don't let him kill you with this thing, Aparna. It has two very different paces." The adjuster smiled. "Control," she said. "And mischievous greater than." "Yes," Klein agreed. "Now, moving on to Reinhard, we have a student who—" Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. "You chopped my girlfriend in half. I am so sorry, Everly. I don't know why. I can't believe It's fine," said Hoyu, holding Everly's stiff form out toward Lexi as if to offer proof. "Look. Fine. You're fine, right, Everly? I'm not mad or anything, but I've been better." It had only been a few seconds, and the team was recovering from the attacks. Alden's shoes crunched on the shard of the lamp Big Snake had thrown that hadn't yet blown away. He was still holding his shield of woven webbing between Galagorus and the others. "We can't stay here." His heart was pounding. An attack from Klein had a tendency to do that. Thinking about the fact that if this were real, Everly would be dead, so quickly from a simple accident, that would get your adrenaline going, too. And who knew how long they had before something else came their way? Instructor Klein had left their team and pelted toward one of Aloysius' teammates, a vocal brute who was running toward the middle of the gym. He seemed to be making a solo break for the finish line. Unless he was just freaking out because Mrs. Zhangdemir had barreled into his team and grabbed their captain. Klein took the running brute down in a similar fashion to Khan. Obviously it was leg breaker day for him. Is Klein's arm stiff? It's kind of hard to tell. At the rate he's moving, he'll be back here in a minute to hit us all again. We take Everly back to the start and see if her suit goes back to normal, Alden said. The wind stopped. Gallagher's repositioning. He glanced over the top of the shield at her. Khan needs to be healed, too, if possible. It's really early in the class for him to be working with one leg, especially if this is the pace we are going to be dealing with. I don't know how it happened, Lexi was saying. Instructor Klein was just so hard to attack, and he was right here in the middle of us all, and Khan, Hoyu, and Alden exchanged looks. In Hoyu's arms, Everly's face was pointed straight up, the neck of her suit not allowing enough freedom of movement for her to do much else. And Lexi was too busy staring at her to notice them. His expression was devastated, and the murder weapon hung short and limp from his right hand. I could take her back by myself while the rest of you press forward, said Khan. All together, Alden said. What if someone attacks you? And don't you have to hop on one leg? I hop like an S rank. And I'm not the most useless S rank despite what certain stories on the internet. What are my parents doing to people? At Hoyu's question, Alden looked around again. In the past few seconds, Heloisa had somehow ended up back at the starting line. Her remaining teammates were scattered like chickens. One of them seemed to be trying to join up with Mehdi's team. And Mrs. Zhangdamir, who'd been grabbing Heloisa the last time Alden had checked, now had Astra tucked under her arm like a stuffed animal with a surprised look stitched on its face. She was running toward the starting line with her Astrid doll while Max was dragged along behind them, clinging to Astrid's ankle like he hoped that might make Hoyu's mother let go. Meanwhile, Jeffy was rolling across the floor from some attack Alden hadn't seen, and Finley was grabbing the heavy lithium bag Jeffy must have dropped when he fell, snatching it up and glaring toward Winston Feather, who was out on the floor now, still without a team. What the? Before Alden could get the words out, his eyes skimmed past Winston and over to Reinhardt's group at the corner opposite from them, still very close to the start. He saw the archer raising his bow in defense as Hoyu's dad ran toward him. Mr. Zhangdamir was currently in between their two teams. Possible arrow from 4 o'clock. Hoyu shifted Everly to one arm and lifted a fist. Lexi turned to see the potential threat, but what he was going to do about it with his whip in embarrassed mode was anyone's guess. Reinhardt released his arrow. Hoyu's father dodged as easily as Alden had expected. Alden tensed, but although it had looked like the arrow might fly right at their team given the direction of the shot, a timely gust from Gallagher's worked in their favor this time. It slowed and turned the projectile. Good call, said Hoyu. We need to watch the ranged people, too. And when Marshall finally gets out here and starts swinging. Enough chatting. Alden's right. Time to run. All together. Khan bonked his brother's shoulder with his forehead. Stop being dumb. Get your whip out. Let's go. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. Excuse me, everyone. Everyone. I need some weights for my team. Some of you took more than your share. Soren. Soren, if you're not going to join us, then you know you should give Olive that sandbag. What do you mean, Fibri? You'd rather have the glow boy? I'm an S and all S team would be a guaranteed win, and this is important. I already checked the volunteer list for the prize, and there are 9 different people I want to train myself against. I'd like to win today and Friday. I know you, Heloisa, Fibri's team is full, so I'll be joining yours. I'll replace your most cowardly member. That one that's dead out past the midline. Sorry. I'm going to beat Mehdi with an all-team, Jupiter. Hey, Hoyu. Your mom is amazing. I want to be her. If you're beating me with all A's, I'm beating you with all A's. Fibri, we need to go. Tyet and Vandy are ready. Leave Soren alone, Winston. Greater than. I don't need defending. Alden's team had just arrived back at the starting line, and the situation here was so darn noisy. He tuned them all out and focused on his own teammates. Fortunately, Everly and Khan had been restored to full mobility, so that meant a trip back to the start was the reset they'd all been hoping it would be. If my parents are grabbing people and hauling them back here, do we need to rethink tying ourselves to each other? Hoyu was asking. I want a minute for making another ice weapon. If I had hit Klein with something that was more like a morning star, maybe. I'm surprised it was so easy to get back here. Alden turned to look out over the gym floor while the others regrouped. He still had his shield preserved. The 50-kilo sandbag was attached to the front, and his zip bag full of dirt with a couple of temper spheres added in for good measure was stuck to the back so that he could reach it if he wanted it. He had loops of spare paracord around his waist like a belt. That was enough prep for another attempt, and he expected there would be a lot of attempts now that they'd seen what it was like out there. He had actually thought it would be a fight just to return to start, but other than him shielding the team from Galacors while they ran, they hadn't had to deal with anything. Why didn't they hit us again on the way back? Instructor Klein and the Gendarmes were still attacking. Alden saw Hoyu's parents going after members of Alois's group and Reinhard's. And Klein was greeting Medi's team, which had just entered the floor a short distance to the right of where Alden now stood, with an aerial approach only slightly different from the one he'd used on them a minute ago. A few voices quieted as the owners realized something interesting was going on beside them. Alden watched as Klein swung off an invisible block positioned about 20 feet in the air. One-handed. Then hit the starting line barrier right over their heads. Mimicking Mr. Gendarme's earlier move, he launched himself powerfully toward Medi's fleeing team. Medi made the bold decision to tackle one of his own teammates out of the way roughly. The instructor let him dodge several strikes himself before taking him down with a brutal kick to the knee. "He hates legs today," Khan muttered. "What's he got against our legs? Can't he break arms to start with like a friendly teacher?" Medi with a broken leg still moved noticeably better than most people as he tried to get a hit of his own in before Klein sprang away from him. "And he's doing one-handed handsprings to spite us," Astrid grumbled. "His time will come." "Everly hit him in the butt," Khan announced. Astrid whirled. "What? Someone landed a hit?" "It was just an ice ball," Everly said, layering ice on another small weight to make a new weapon. "I should have given it spikes." "Astrid, we're about to go. We need to get back to the others," Max protested as his morph brute bounded into the middle of Alden's team to give Everly a celebratory hug. While Astrid shook Everly back and forth enthusiastically, Alden kept trying to get a visual handle on what was going on. Medi was ordering his team to move forward. The huge sandbag on his back and his own high agility were helping him deal with the wind, but Alden thought it was a strange choice for him not to just launch himself back over the starting line to fix the broken leg. Big Snake was lifting something that looked like a boulder made of dried paint out of his eclectic ammo collection. Mrs. Gendarme was going for one of the scattered members of Alois's team who was belly-crawling toward the finish. Ahead of the belly-crawler, there was another wispy flare of the strange light that had to be caused by Ignacio's grandmother, since she didn't seem to be doing anything else from her perch against the barrier at the midline. This is a lot to process. Students on the floor out there, people who hadn't even made a first attempt yet raising their voices at each other back here. Galacors lowering her hands and taking a lap for another reposition, Klein taking out a runner's leg. And Hoyu's parents were both running this way now, each of them with a superpowered teenager in their arms, their victims' struggles being ignored as easily as a sleepy toddler's would have been. "I don't think I can follow it all." He took a step that put him as close to the starting line as possible without passing through the barrier. "If they're moving this fast and there are this many of them and I don't even know what those light wisps do or how many she cast while we were under attack by Klein." It felt like there was more action happening on the floor in 10 seconds than he could unravel in a minute, and it would only get worse once the others got out there, got their bearings, and started getting serious. "What do we do to cross? Assign one member of the team to monitor every adult?" But the whole team had to respond when under attack if they wanted to have any chance of repelling the trouble without injury. He had thought maybe the volunteers and the instructors would deliver punishing injuries that would slow progress without halting it. But broken legs and stolen teammates was a little more potent than a slowing. Every attack could result in a situation where you needed a teammate to return here to have their suit undamaged. With those attacks coming so quickly, no wonder it might take 2 days of class for someone to reach the end. This situation actually looked impossible to defeat right now, at least with a whole team. Maybe 3 or 4 people could get taken down like sacrificial lambs along the way, while the remainder of their group ran for victory. But if it was a team challenge, was that even valid? Heloise's faithless teammates were basically demolished, so running and crawling ahead without her hadn't gotten them anywhere. We really are lucky they didn't just kill us all on our way back, or our whole team would be lying on the floor in a pile of petrified bodies. Lucille and Finley were looking insanely lucky, too, just crouching out there together with heavyweights keeping their feet on the ground. Jeffy, trying to get back to join them, had just become a target for Klein. "Jeffy!" bellowed Max from where he stood on Alden's right. "Jeffy, you read your text messages." Alden could practically hear the unspoken "you dumbass" in Max's voice. When he glanced over, he saw his fellow B rank was doing more or less the same thing as him. Standing at the starting line, staring really hard at the massacre taking place on the floor. It made Alden feel a little competitive. "I can notice stuff, too." He resolved himself to being over-challenged by information quantity and just getting on with it. After all, he had already volunteered to be the member of their team who focused on the game's rules. Jeffy was now down to one leg. Maddie's team was in the process of being wrecked like Heloise's. Lucille and Finley were still standing there. That seems unfair. Max's teammates had been out there longer than anyone else. Why are 2S's going unattacked? Oh. He texted his team. "Alden, I think Big Snake, Klein, and Hoyu's parents only attack people who are moving toward the finish line. We can head back to start or stand still out there, and those 3 should leave us alone." Just the realization that moving forward was a prerequisite for being attacked made the battle out there significantly less complicated. The instructors and volunteers weren't randomly picking victims. There must be a rotation of some kind they were each adhering to, and the thing making it look completely random right now was the fact that every time it was Lucille and Finley's turn, they were being skipped over, meaning there were more attackers focused on fewer moving targets. "Alden, so we never want to be the only team moving forward. And we should wait for some of these others to get their shit together and get out there. We'll use a run-stop-run strategy to avoid some attacks. One rule at a time. Figure out what kind of chaos you're facing, Alden. That's how you survive." Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. It was so embarrassing to lie on the floor with a pair of huge sausage-shaped sandbags beside you, just waiting for your 4S-ranked teammates to fight their way back to you. Figuring out that people were safer if they didn't move forward or try to attack someone had taken Soren's team about 15 minutes. Vandy, Tayet, Fabry, and Ignacio were all so good at attacking and so dedicated to moving toward the finish that they hadn't noticed the pattern happening until they'd gotten wiped out a few times. Ever since, when it was time to go back to the starting line to collect lost teammates, Soren's only job was to lie where they'd left him, between the bags so that he was protected from wind and largely protected from the shrapnel that was becoming more of a problem. He couldn't even practice glowing anymore, since technically that was the beginning of an attack for him. A way to generate light in pitch dark so that he could still shape. It might make him a valid target. I'm the class joke. My most valuable ability is holding onto bags and not getting blown away. I don't want to cause problems for the team, but this is torture. At least not going back to the start anymore meant he didn't have to hear Winston making comments about how someone being babysat by a bunch of S's didn't need 2 sandbags. He wanted heavy bags for a couple of his own teammates, and he was just trying to guilt Soren into giving them to him. Last time Soren had argued with him, Winston had made things especially weird by trying a new tactic and insisting that Olive was a girl. Like Soren was incapable of noticing her very nice girlish qualities on his own. And like it meant something that obligated them all to something archaic. If Olive wanted to ask for a bag, she could ask for a bag. And Soren would tell her no because sharing resources with competitors was not a normal part of this class. The elemental weights had been limited in number for a reason. Getting off the floor when the wind hit and getting to them first had been part of the game, and if Soren was going to give them back, He'd give them back to Tayet and Ignacio, who'd gotten them for their team in the first place. And they wouldn't give them to Olive either because they could use them themselves in various ways. Ignacio was already talking about knifing one open before class ended in about half an hour and throwing the sand in Klein's eyes for a surprise. At least Olive has illusions she can actually work with. She's even got them looking alright in the wind, and she surprised Omega Scorpidemir with one. These bags are the only thing keeping me from being even more helpless. Soren had put a lot of his points into strength, so he could carry them. He could block Instructor Waker's throws with them if Fabry ever failed to yank him out of the way in time. If he got separated from the team when they needed to move forward, he could get back to them with the bag's help. The thing I can't do is shape. He tried for the billionth time to wrap his head around his element. The gym was full of light from the transparent ceiling high overhead. Light was everywhere. But he was supposed to be able to shape it like it wasn't radiation. Like it was this solid thing like water or ground, and that was. He did have the ability. He had caught himself on fire with it. Twice actually. Both times he'd been desperate and angry. He had managed to hide it the first time. The second. "Are you all right, Soren?" Fabry's voice. A thump as a foot landed on the bag to Soren's left. They were back. He sat up and looked at his teammate. Fabry's short black hair was all blowing toward him in the heavy wind. He had one hand wrapped around the bag handle, and the other was giving Tayet a point of solidity to cling to. "I'm fine. I'm just the class joke." "What?" Soren didn't get a chance to brush it off. Before he could, there was a series of unfamiliar, sharp cracking sounds from ahead of them and off to the left. The same direction the wind was currently blowing from. The direction the two lead teams were in. Lucille's team. Conan Hoyu's. A second later, Ignacio shouted a warning. Vandy lifted her hands. And then they were all in the middle of a hailstorm. "What?" Fabry asked again, this time looking around to see the team that was the source of the flying ice. Soren tried to move into a squat just so he'd be ready for whatever fresh disaster this was after a class full of that kind of thing, but when he tried to push off the floor with a hand, his palm landed on a small ice chip that burned with cold. And the hand shot out from under him like he'd set it in a puddle of oil. Ignacio had taken a step at the wrong moment, too. He fell into Vandy before riding himself. "It's not normal ice," Tayet said. "This is Everly's patch SP, hey." Greater than. She and Fabry both ducked as a piece the size of a cafeteria tray flipped through the air toward them. "What are they doing?" Vandy asked. "I just want to know why they're always in front of us no matter how fast we move. Are Hoyu's parents going easy on him or something?" Fabry said. "I don't think so. Sensei taken him back to the start more than any other member of that team," Vandy said seriously. "I know that, Vandy, I just don't understand why they're always out in front with Lucille's team." Line of asterisks. "I don't know what kind of falling out you're having with your weapon, but it had better do some more of that super fast whipping around that killed me earlier. Right now," Everly said, standing barefoot in the center of the big ice patch they'd just managed to make together by keeping her spell impression powder protected from the wind with Alden's shield. "I'm doing my best," Lexi said. He was sitting on the ice between Everly's ankles and the shield, along with Khan and Alden. There was slapping the ice, carving out chunks and shards and sending them flying. Hoyu wasn't with them. He was trying to make a solo return trip after his father, laughing, had hauled him back to the starting line for the 11th time since class had started. "Faster!" yelled Everly. "Yeah, faster!" shouted Khan. "What is this weak whippery? I know you two are trying to fix him, but you're just going to give him anxiety," Alden thought. There was moving better than it had been. For most of the class, Lexi had had such a tight rein on it whenever it was long that it had been acting more like a lance or a sword than a whip. At least he was letting it be flexible again. All of this was part of a desperate plan to hit Instructor Klein with some ice. Or just make him slip on some ice. The agility monster was currently downwind near the starting line, going after Winston's team. It would be their team's turn next, according to the rotation that Alden had figured out for Klein, and the only way to prevent a leg breaking was to hit the instructor with something he would consider a successful attack. Hitting him up close was nearly impossible with Ruther being less earthy than usual. Maybe, distracted with another team, a single ice chip would find its way beneath the son of Anil's feet. And he'd slip a millimeter and decide to count it. Rewarding attacks he considered successful enough was Klein's only weakness as an opponent. He and instructor Sleyca were still teaching the same lessons they had on the first week of class. Klein wanted to see good offense. Big Snake wanted to see defense. Show you learned the lesson by hitting Klein with something, or protect yourself or a teammate from one of Big Snake's pitches, and you'd be skipped for a rotation even if you were moving forward. Big Snake was easy. Klein was a menace. A flicker of light between them and their enemy made Alden pull up the aerial shot of the gym floor he'd borrowed from drone footage. With a thought, he added another X to it and approximately the spot where he'd seen the flicker. This was his homemade map of electrocution traps. Those things would kill you. X's got added whenever he saw a flicker and subtracted whenever he saw someone die in a trap. His little map here wasn't perfect, but it was preventing a lot of accidents for their team. They were approaching the three-quarter mark. It was the most forward progress they'd made since class started, and they really wanted to be off Klein's hit list for just one round so that they could make a break for the finish when Hoyu reached them. By now, every team had realized that standing in place was a trick to avoid attacks, but their team and Maxa seemed to be the only ones actively aware of and trying to manipulate the situation with Klein and Big Snake. Marcia regularly got Klein to leave her team alone, but that was because Marcia attacked every single time she thought she had the slightest chance. Judging by a comment she'd made the last time they'd ended up back at the starting line with her, she was upset that she wasn't getting as many turns to face Klein head-on as everyone else seemed to be, instead of proud that she was being acknowledged as a good threat. Max had had to clap a hat over Jeffy's mouth before the Aqua Brute could tell her how it worked. Alden, I finally figured out the Zhangdamir tactics. When they start to approach us, whoever makes a move to attack or get in between them and a teammate first is the one who gets stolen and taken back to the start. That's why it's always Hoyu for our team. He's the one who watches them the most, so he sees them coming and responds first. The team had gotten used to him texting in the heat of whatever was going on. There was just no point in waiting. Everyone could read when they got a chance and stopped being ice machines. Hit it hard. Greater than Khan bellowed in Russian. Suddenly the ice was making a sizzling noise as Lexi whipped it. Khan brightened. More. The battle against the ice and cold is in our blood. Greater than. Alden, I think the Mr. and Mrs. Zhangdamir approach is about improving our teamwork. Teams ought to be putting people who can run back from the start on their own in front of the danger anyway. It's like they're giving us a way to pick who gets separated from the rest. You've got this, Lexi. He encouraged as soon as he finished typing. He didn't want his analysis to put a damper on whatever ice-fighting Russian imagery seemed to be working for the brothers. That was also why he wasn't mentioning the fact that rather throwing platter-sized chunks of magical ice at all the teams behind them wasn't going to be a popular thing. Marcia was sithing on suspecting classmates like weed any time her follow-up stroke missed one of the adults, so they were hardly as bad as that. Alden heard the pop of Ruther suddenly moving more like Ruther, followed by a series of incredibly fast cracks from the ice, and he watched as the glowing golden chain went nuts for a second. The light from it burned itself into his eyes, and then, just as quickly as it had started, it was back to looking all stiff, like an overlong rapier. But the blizzard of unnaturally slippery ice chips they'd hoped for was sliding, skittering, and soaring across the gym. A few pieces were thrown by Ruther itself. Others were driven by the wind. Yes! Shouted Everly, throwing a fist into the air as some of the smaller chips sprinkled down over their ultimate target. And literally everyone currently in between them and Klein, including Hoyu's mother and father, who both turned away from the teams they'd been heading toward with wolfish grins. Shit, said Alden. Alden, by the way, I think Hoyu's parents might also take long-distance attacks against them as an invitation. Chapter 194. Stop, said Alden, ignoring the jostling as the others halted right behind him. No more careful walks or extended conversations. They had 15 minutes left of class, and they had to make this run count. He was trying to focus on all the necessary details, and in this particular second, the priority was Instructor Klein. The agility brute was across the gym, finishing off a whirlwind of an attack on Vandy. Fibri shouted something that was probably a curse, grabbed Vandy to carry her onward, and Klein's head turned for the briefest of moments toward Alden's increasingly frustrated team. Hoyu was permanently flushed now. Even though he was deliberately stepping up to be his parents' primary target on their team, he was probably hitting his limit. The spell impression that helped him stay on his feet wasn't nearly as good as the skills that helped his parents keep their own footing, and it showed when they were repeatedly prying him off the floor. He wanted to be able to stand with them in dangerous places so much that he'd asked Ashurti for advice. And despite his even keel and general optimism, he had expected, and been expected by most people who grew up with him, to be an ass who had to feel like crap at a time like this, to be getting such frequent reminders that he was miles away from being able to look after his own family. Klein was moving again, toward Reinhardt's team. Go. Move. Go. Alden yelled, already running. Snake. Screamed Everly. Watching Instructor Waker was her current assignment. Carrying Constantine, who had one broken leg again, was Hoyu's. Whenever Everly called out a warning, they all tried to act with coordination based on whatever the wind situation was. No wind now. Alden moved the shield aside for Lexi to intercept the flying blur with Ruther and re-angled it to cover himself and the other three from any debris that might get tossed toward them. Don't hit my shield with Ruther. Don't. Lexi didn't. A piece of painted board, slowed and sliced by the whip but not entirely diverted, smashed into it instead. No problem. The board bounced off, and a moment later, Alden leaped over it easily, grateful for the self-mastery word chain. They were all still running, and his head was moving as he took in the situation behind them. Now Klein was. Stop. Alden shouted. A flick of Klein's eyes toward them as the man sprang away from his last victim, a smile so slight that Alden probably shouldn't be thinking of it as threatening, and then Klein was going for Winston. Winston's legs and his mouth were both getting enough exercise this class. Every time Alden heard him, he was complaining about his team being treated unfairly, and every time he saw him out on the floor, Winston was running circles around his own teammates like a protective sheepdog. Go. Go. His tension was up because it was their team's turn for a visit from Klein. It had been their team's turn for a while. They were trying to avoid him by stopping every time he finished an attack on another group. As long as they weren't moving forward when he glanced their way. Stop. Alden's shoes squeaked against the floor. And now Mr. Zhangdemir should be looking at them, too. Did he have to run through the rotation so fast? Alden watched Hoyu's father glance at them and then at Max's team, his eyes skimming over both, his smile wide. Max was excellent at monitoring the rotation and ordering stops of his own, so Mr. Zhangdemir wouldn't be running in his direction. And we're only 2 stolen classmates away from being back on Mrs. Zhangdemir's to-do list, Alden thought. That meant he had to start watching her a little harder now, too. If the 2 groups that were next on her lineup were keeping track of the rotation, they might stop and get passed over. Alden still wasn't sure if people other than him and Max were bothering to remember it all or not. Most of them seemed to have an idea of which team got picked off immediately before their own, but everyone was making a lot of mistakes, so it was hard to tell who was ignorant of the attack rotations from the adults and who just sucked at monitoring them. Alden's team didn't want to sacrifice anyone else, so that meant monitoring absolutely everything from this point on. Go. The wind was back. Alden barely noticed himself blocking it anymore. Watching Galakor's reposition had been his main job all class period, and it had finally gotten habitual. He even appreciated it when the wind started up now. His shield was amazing for it, and other teams were worse at coping with it. The difficult environment increased the likelihood that they'd screw up, which meant the rotation was less likely to have skips in it that he didn't anticipate. Stop. Go. Stop. Right. 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 According to his map, there was a trio of electric traps in their current section of the gym that had to be dodged. The good thing about the rightward run was that it didn't count as forward progress for attack purposes. The bad thing was that it put them almost side by side with Max's team, and while Alden liked all the members of that team, he also worried about accidentally running into one of Max's zones, or having one dropped in front of them on purpose. Student-on-student attacks had largely been accidental damage so far. Who had time to worry about everyone else when they were all struggling against bigger fish? Alden hadn't even seen some teams make it to the midway point yet, at least not all together. Drama was mostly back at the starting line when people were resetting for another go at it, and it was mostly intra-team instead of inter-team squabbles going on. But the possibility of direct attacks out here definitely existed. And now wouldn't be a terrible time for one, if Max's team wanted to try it. Teams at the three-quarter mark, which they were both at now, were always the front of the pack. With time getting tight, pushing this far felt more like a last chance. And if a person did think there would be some additional benefit for their team arriving first, then trimming your nearest competition out of the equation before a final blast for the finish wasn't unreasonable. Alden wasn't sure how Max's team felt about that kind of thing. He and his own companions were taking the stance that it was hard enough to deal with the real enemies, and if there was some kind of first prize, it wouldn't be worth attacking another team for it. They were drawing the line at not worrying about their own collateral damage. It was just too much and nobody else was stressing over it. So if an electric kettle bounced off of Hoyu's fist and knocked someone on another team out, fine. But no aiming for them with it. They ended up freezing again right beside Max's group. Alden was too busy monitoring all the others, 2 Gendarmes, and 1 Klein to appreciate the fact that Jeffy was balancing on a single foot and Max was calmly looking around from his perch on top of Lucille's back while the wind blew so hard his cheeks were getting flattened by it. "Hey, Finley," Con called. "You should definitely go run at Omega Scorpy. Both of them. Think of how cool it will look on the class footage." "Not again, thanks," said Finley, while Astrid made faces at them all from her own piggyback position. "It would really help us out. Be a hero. I've been electrocuted 3 times, and punching Hoyu's mom is like introducing my hand to an iron bar." "You punched my mom? You bitter da. I thought it would surprise him into dropping me." "Go!" shouted Alden. At the same time, Max was yelling, "Run!" When both teams stopped a beat later, Max's was out in front. Max being carried by Lucille and Astrid on Finley's back meant their slowest member was Jeffy on 1 foot with a sandbag. And Jeffy was unexpectedly good on 1 foot. "He is driven by pure enthusiasm, isn't he?" Lexi muttered. "Am I being too slow?" Everly asked. "I'm tired, but—" "No, you're fine," said Alden. "I'm the one setting the pace and I wasn't holding back because of you. I just can't see what's going on everywhere and run my fastest now that I'm trying to keep track of all 3 of them. Should I be less cautious? If we really pushed on the next run, we're fine," said Con. "Look at that beautiful broken bicycle instructor Waker's going to throw at us next. That's all we need to claim our first place. Lexi will stop it. You'll all hold onto it, and I'll save." "No, Lexi," Everly and Hoyu said at the same time. "Go!" Alden called. "Alden, did I miss hearing about a bicycle plant?" "Yes," said Con. "No," said Lexi. "Just keep running." Alden almost didn't see Mr. Jangdamir's turning face in time. "Stop. Stop." Everly smacked into his back. Mr. Jangdamir scooped up a flailing Medi instead. Alden was about to call for another mini-sprint, but too many teams were stopped. And now Klein was glancing their way unexpectedly. Con was still talking. "All I need is something big snake through in the last 5 minutes that's big enough for the rest of you to hold on. Go." "No. Stop." "Sorry." Everly bumped into him again. "I can help call out for one of the Jangdamirs if you want," said Lexi. "You're on shrapnel duty," Alden replied. "I can do it," said Hoyu. "Since I'm actually with you all for a change instead of running back from the start." Khan was supposed to be helping watch for the flashes of light that indicated another shock trap going down from Mrs. Sethi, since Alden couldn't catch all of them. He looked ahead to where Max's group had managed a run forward that was only about 3 steps long before freezing. At least it's not just me who's having trouble finding an opening. It was getting overwhelming now that they were in this position. Alden, we don't want to sacrifice Hoyu again, do we? What if we can't get him back fast enough this time? Everly asked. It's a long run. Sacrifice me, Khan said. Just give me rope or our biggest sandbag first. I'll have it drag me back, and then nobody will say I'm the most useless S. What are you talking, Abe? Alden's heart rate spiked even before he fully understood the problem that might be about to land on them. It was a visual wrongness that tipped him off. There were 8 teams. Sometimes a couple of whole teams would be out of play back at the starting line, but there were always multiple people moving forward. Suddenly, the situation on the expansive white floor looked different than it had for nearly 2 hours. Only 2 teams taking steps toward the finish. Marcia and Jupiter were attacking Instructor Klein together now. Despite Marcia occasionally shouting something like, "This one's mine," or "Don't help this time," Jupiter seemed immune to requests of that nature. She'd gotten her magical mitts on a huge tree stump, and it was careening around her team, on a path to intercept the instructor. Mrs. Zhangdemir was running back to the start with a ferocious Heloisa in her grip. And Mr. Zhangdemir was pouncing on Rebecca, who'd managed to get 3 whole boingy jumps in before he caught her this time. When that's over, it should be. But nobody else is moving forward. People were regrouping at the starting line. They were standing still with teammates. Max was ahead, not moving. Alden saw it all in a blink. He realized what it might mean just a little slower. What happens to the rules if everyone stops going forward? Do the attacks just stop coming? Or do the adults go for the group that's overdue? We're the group that's overdue for all 3 of them. This was the price for being observant and winning at the stop-and-go strategy game. Increasing difficulty. He didn't know whether to shout, "Go!" or "Don't move a muscle." The whole class freezing doesn't work. If everyone is stopped, nobody will ever make the first move. The attackers must have anticipated the possibility, so that means, go. Go. Go for the finish line. He said. Don't stop. They are coming. If his team was confused, they didn't ask questions. Snake! Shouted Everly. The wind was blowing. Alden just plowed ahead and hoped Lexi figured out how to deal with a bicycle missile on his own. Max, Finley, Astrid, Lucille, and Jeffy were running flat out, too, now. Damn it, thought Alden. Did he arrange this on purpose? Max's team was owed a series of brutal attacks, too. Both Zhangdemir's and Klein. But they weren't next on the list. Alden's team was next. Which means as long as we're running forward, they can safely run forward. The roar of the wind in his ears, a leap over the remains of a desk Big Snake must have thrown at someone earlier, a motion in his peripheral that had to be Klein's approach. We were almost there. And then he was trying to dodge, hopelessly, as Klein hit him like a battering ram. A clarifyingly sharp pain in his thigh was accompanied by a couple of negligible ones as he fell on top of his own shield with a grunt. The wind he'd been keeping off of them hit hard as he lost preservation, but it hardly mattered. This run was unrecoverable. Khan was on the floor, holding on to him and Everly and yelling something. Lexi and Hoyu were both off the floor, in the arms of Haoyu's parents on their way back to the start. Alden wanted to curse a little. A lot. The constant back and forth. All class. So close this time. It was our best run. I don't actually think I can do better than I just did at the paying attention part. Crap, crap, crap. This is bullshit. His brain felt like floor potatoes. He wanted the sauna. And a bed somewhere. And he was still pretending this was training for Book of Demons, so the loss hurt a little extra. Alright, he said. Sorry about that, guys. Alden, sorry, guys. I didn't think about what might happen if there wasn't another group trying to move forward at all. I think they would have had to attack us anyway in that situation, so I called for the run hoping we could make it. I'll keep that in mind next run. We've still got time to do this. That smiley face looks pissed off. Why is there a pissed off smiley? You're so upbeat, Alden, Everly said to Redley. The wind had just quit again. He let his head flop over to the side so that he could see her face. They were both lying on the floor. Con had let go of their legs, and he was sitting up with a sigh. Everly's silver braid was draped over the high neck of her gym suit. Her face was sweaty. Her glitter eye makeup had smeared sideways on one eye. Honestly, she said, I'm going to keep it, but I'm not in a nice mood anymore. Oh, said Alden. The floor felt pretty good against his face. I'm faking it. I'm actually tired as shit and having unkind thoughts about our teachers. I'm bright-eyed and happy as a ground shaper in mud, said Con. I could eat a brute for breakfast. Duper supers, and by my powers, I am amazing. Everly snorted. Galacourse is almost finished with her lap of the gym, said Con. And you're napping on our shield. He slapped the bottom of Alden's sneaker on the leg that was now officially broken and subject to movement restriction. Stop lying around. Rabbits are supposed to be all bouncy. I'm getting up. I'm getting up. Alden picked himself and his shield up in time to meet the gust. All right. Con said brightly. Now we'll grab those pieces of bicycle leather made for us and go back to collect our people. We've got 4 functional legs to get there on. 4 is plenty for 3 people, Alden said. Wanting more would be selfish of us, Con agreed. Line of asterisks. Alden couldn't figure out how the team ahead of them had failed to win, but shortly after he and Con staggered over the starting line and got their legs unstiffened, Max's group was right behind them. Lucille was now carrying Finley and Astrid, who were both either dead or unconscious judging by their total immobility. What happened? Alden asked. Max glared at him. I was just making conversation. The adjuster grimaced and rubbed a hand over his eyes. I apologize. I'm mentally drained and very disappointed in myself for missing something obvious. I'm going to get my water bottle. Alden watched him go, then looked curiously at Astrid. We're telling you nothing, she said brightly. Well, there's a bold red line on the floor at the far end of the gym now, said Lexi. So I'm guessing there's a surprise right before we get to the finish line. Yes, but you don't know what the surprise is, said Astrid. It kills you. Like most gym surprises. So fun, said Constantine. I can still make this work. He was waving 2 pieces of bicycle around like a madman. Let's do it. Let's go. My turn. Alden stared at him. I feel like I've missed something you want to do. What's the plan with the bicycle? Con beckoned him closer like he was going to whisper a secret, then spoke in a normal volume. I can use my skill on the bicycle to envision it back in Big Snake's ammo collection, then I use my spell on it. We all hold onto part of it and fly across the gym faster than we could run. Right to the finish line. Alden studied the bicycle. It was one of the rental ones available all over in Zedora that he'd used so often while he was in intake. Red, a frame that had probably been warped before Big Snake even threw it, now in 2 pieces thanks to Ruther. That doesn't look like an airplane. I do understand what you're saying, but aren't there some serious problem with this idea? No. It'll work. Did he get the hang of moving stuff with his powers when I was absent on Monday? Alden wondered. From the last he had seen of Con's private practices in the gym, the adjuster had been great at making whatever he was casting on relic it, but the speed of the relocation ranged from pretty fast to nearly instantaneous. And what happened if the bicycle tried to repair itself while it dragged them across the gym? Alden wasn't sure whether he should be picturing a trip toward Instructor Waker that was like an amusement park ride with no seat belts, or some kind of horror show where his arms got yanked out of their sockets, and a bicycle brake cable pierced through him on its way to reconnect itself. I want to make sure everyone gets to try whatever they want to. Con flipped a 1-ton weight on top of himself on Monday, Lexi said. The bicycle might just drag us across the floor into a trap. Or rip itself out of our hands as soon as he starts to cast, said Hoyu. I guess we could tie ourselves to it, but I'd rather not bet on it until we have to. Con looked at Everly. She smiled at him and her shoulders drew up toward her ears. Con. Have you figured out how to control the speed yet? He gasped. Alden, do you see this? My brother, my girlfriend, and my dear friend of many years have no faith in me. But you believe, right? He had such an expectant look on his face. If he'd still been missing his front teeth, Alden might have had to agree to try out his scheme on the spot. Can we save that until after the next run when we're a little more desperate? He asked. Con groaned. Just one more run, Alden said apologetically. Maybe we can use your spell as a surprise move at the end. Con groaned even louder. All right, said Everly, let's kill Instructor Klein, said a voice from behind them. Alden turned to see Max tapping a finger against the side of his water bottle while he watched what was happening on the floor. If there's one less enemy, I think we could reach the end. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. Olive is doing fine. By the time she graduates from the program, she should have the talents she needs to make her illusions realistic enough to trick some of us, as well as most dangerous avowed she might encounter during the course of her career. For now, she can't mimic scent. The sounds her illusions make tend to be slightly off. Those combined with other beginner insufficiencies should make it very easy for you all to tell which one is real. Torsten rubbed at the back of his neck. I think it's fair, as her instructor, to occasionally take her bait when she creates particularly exceptional illusions. I'm sending you all examples of her best work in class so far. When she matches or exceeds it, rewarding that with a false error on your part is an option. There's no replacement for the instant feedback a class like this provides, Aparna said approvingly. Helping them notice their own successes is as important as showing them how far they still have left to go. Torsten brought up the next wanted poster. In it, a tall, dark-skinned boy was holding his arms out to conspicuously cast a spell. His brown eyes were focused on a point in front of him while an athletic brunette girl with an eager smile on her face leaped toward him from the side. She slowed as if caught suddenly in a pool of water, her feet off the floor as she drifted. This is Max, said Torsten. He's very good at persuading his classmates to run headlong into his zones, as you can see with Eloisa here. I like him, Aparna said at once. What's he doing here at Chelena North? Send him to me at Nyodin. I thought you might approve of an adjuster with trapping spells up his sleeves. Max is exceptionally driven and intelligent. His spell impressions have been well chosen for providing him with utility while inconveniencing his enemies. Frankly, at his age and with his mindset, we might have been fast-tracking him through to uni if he were an S. As it is, facing some of his less mature classmates and accepting their strengths and advantages over him may be what he needs at this point in his life. The rank gap is too wide for some Bs. Melanie Carrison looked up from the personal notes she had been taking on each student. We had significant percentages drop out when I was a student here. Dropouts aren't much of an issue these days among the Bs. We accept so few now. The ones who make it through are up to the challenge of classes full of more powerful competition. Usually. I'm a few years younger than you, Melanie, so it must have been different, said Hale, but I remember the Bs in my classes being unusually ambitious and creative. They often outperformed higher-ranked students, and most of them have become quite successful in whatever jobs they've found. Though they are not as famous for their work as they should be. People find solid performers who do their jobs without stunning successes or failures unworthy of attention, said Klein. Regardless of rank. It's a shame that everyday effort and competence don't get the appreciation they deserve in the current environment. That's something I hope we prepare these young people for as well. Behind him, Eloisa had escaped from the first trap only to be caught on an invisible treadmill. Torsten said, Max took criticism he was given during his first application attempt seriously, too seriously, to be honest, and came back to us looking like a very different candidate 6 months later. That's the kind of bold decision-making and stubbornness I look forward to watching develop into something special. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. Let's kill him, Max repeated. We'll need at least 8 people, 1 member of each team, so that nobody worries about another team stealing first while the rest of us are distracted. They kill Klein while everyone else draws the attention of Omega Scorpi Zhang, Omega Scorpi Demir, and Instructor Waker. When Klein's down, even if he doesn't stay down, his own personal restrictions mean. You know about his restriction. He was looking at Alden. Yes. Alden, he means if a member of every team attacks Klein, then even if he has the option of coming back here to have his suit unfrozen like the rest of us, his own rules should make him leave us alone for a minute or two. The reward for a successful attack was a reprieve from the instructor's own attacks. Surely him dying was successful enough for everyone involved to get credit. Max nodded. So we drop him, and then it's every team for themselves as we make a break for the finish. Chapter 195. Alden, said Max, we'll need your help. Good. Tired as Alden was, the idea of being involved in a plan like this was energizing. I'm willing to do whatever you think I can. Let's go for it. Max lowered his voice. I'll handle getting Klein into position at the right moment. You take charge of texting everybody and helping them to coordinate. Oh. Okay. Hoyu chuckled. Alden shot him a look. I think he wanted to help kill. I'll be the text messaging person, Alden interrupted his roommate. That's something I can totally be responsible for. No problem. Max frowned at him. You're fast at it. And for the attack, we do need to use the high ranks who can deal significant. I understand that. And aren't you quite close to wearing out your skill? Sure. I'm the phone guy. That's me. What's the plan? Speed, said Max. If this isn't over in the time it takes for Gallicourse to run one of her laps, then we've probably lost our chance. Here's how I think it should go. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. Alden, good evening, everybody. As you might have noticed, the end of class is nigh, and none of us are doing as well as we'd like. My team and Max's are back at the starting line, and we've come up with a plan that will take a lot of pressure off everybody if it's successful. This might give us all a chance of making it to the finish line before the end of class. A squad of high-speed, high-fence representatives from each team will be put together for the purpose of ending Instructor Klein's reign of terror. We don't have time for a debate. The only thing you have to do if you want to participate is agree to send the teammate in question to a designated spot when Gallicourse next repositions. Klein will be there, as will Omega Scorpi. The chosen fighters should ignore Omega Scorpi. Focus all attack efforts on Klein. Once Klein is dead, you can go back to your own teams. As thanks for your participation, you will be rewarded with a feeling of pride and a pair of maps marking the location of all the flashing electrocution traps that are known to my team and Max's. The maps and the absence of one evil agility brute should make your final runs easier. We hope the following avowed will agree to be squad members: Lexi, Finley, Eloisa, Tyet, Reinhardt, Marcia, Medi, Winston. Please reply swiftly. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. There's a text message for us all. Greater than Ignacio's Meister knives were in his hands, and while the members of their team jogged forward, he was looking at a pile of broken electronics and smashed wood that had formed against the barrier to their right. Big Snake had been throwing for long enough, and the wind had been blowing for long enough, for a few drifts like that to appear in the gym. Soren had noticed Ignacio glancing at them several times now. You're checking random texts? Fabry shouted over the wind. Who has time for that? Watch for that crazy man. He keeps praising my efforts while he's carrying me around like a boy brutally doll. I just know he's going to tell Hoyu I tripped. Tripping in a situation like that could happen to anyone, Soren said. He wasn't glad that the others had gotten more and more stressed, but he was glad that them being stressed gave him something to do. Trying to cheer them up wasn't much, but it was better than lying on the floor waiting to be saved. Or being carried back to the start because he had been killed by a strike from Marcia. Or having people make comments about his sandbags. His teammates had cut one up for the sound and discovered that throwing it in their instructor's face was about as effective as everything else they'd tried against him. but Soren still had a 120-kilo one. Holding onto it kept his feet firmly on the ground, and he could imagine he was giving whoever was behind him, Tayet right now, a break from the wind if nothing else. His muscles were burning from carrying weights all class, so at least he'd gotten a workout for his body even if his power was good for nothing. "You've been doing apex-level work, February," he added. "We're ahead of everyone right now." Hoyu and Khan's team had gotten wiped out making a bold run for the finish, and Lucille's team had run into the trap that Ignacio had quietly warned them would probably be waiting at the end of the gym. He knew his own grandmother's talent, so there was an advantage there. "I'm an agility brute. I can't trip. I might have to change schools after this." "The message is from Alden," Tayet said, her own voice at a volume that made it difficult for Soren to hear her. "I don't know what to. You all should read it. I'll do whatever the team wants." "You check messages during class, too," Fabri exclaimed. "We need to stop now," said Vandy. "I think Mrs. Zhangdamir might come for us next." Soren wished she would deliver warnings in a less factual tone. Across the gym, Alden had been yelling stop and go so urgently that Soren had almost obeyed him a couple of times. Vandy was good at reporting possible danger compared to the rest of them, but with Fabri being so rambunctious and talkative, more so as he got annoyed with himself, sometimes the importance of her words didn't register through his chatter. Now they did, and Soren halted, looking toward the finish through eyes he had to keep in a squint thanks to the wind. "Instructor Waker's almost done with his pile of trash. He's not going to come out here and fight at closer range when he runs out of things to throw, is he?" He tightened his grip on his sandbag's handle, while he reached up to check the message notification with the other hand. Everyone was quiet for a few seconds. "Why do they want?" "Shut up." Greater than Ignacio hissed, elbowing Fabri in the arm. "Secret. You know? Secret. But I want to." Fabri lowered his voice. "I feel like I should have been selected. That's all I'm saying." "Of course we should do this," Vandy said quietly. "If the rest of the teams are going to try, we can't take advantage of their efforts and race ahead of them." "Having the maps would be nice, too," said Tayet. She touched the dart case hanging from a belt at her hip. "Wouldn't it? I don't mind going. I can make it back to you all." They were all exchanging looks and nods. The looks and nods didn't really include Soren. "I'm so tired of myself. Wish it could be me." "Make sure you get him," said Fabri. "I want to help. I'll come get you if anything goes wrong. Do you want some knives?" Greater than Ignacio patted one of the modified knife rolls slung over his shoulders. Tayet shook her head. "I hope people understand how to time a group attack," Vandy was saying. "Getting everyone to cooperate might be harder than they're expecting. Someone could hurt you accidentally, Tayet. Maybe we should send one more person with you as backup." "You should all go," Soren said. 4 pairs of eyes looked at him. "You should." 3 more S's. He was looking at the list. It was obvious what the teams planning this had wanted from the attackers. Fast, because Instructor Klein was fast. The most lethal shots possible, because only one might make it through. This wasn't supposed to be a drawn-out fight. But they'd been limited by needing to pick a member of each team. Nobody would have agreed to help if one team was being left out. It would be like giving them a free win. But Ignacio would definitely have been included if he'd been on another team. Fabri would be better than Mehdi or Heloisa. This is a way I can help, encouraging them to do something other than guard me like I'm a baby. "All of you go," he said. "Watch each other's backs and coordinate with each other so that the plan works better for everyone and you all get back safely." Vandy might even get a chance to attack. The Sky Shaper couldn't do much with her element when her mother was dominating it. An attack that took place during Galacrus's down period would let her work. "I'll lie on the floor between the sandbag and the barrier. Nothing will hit me, and I won't move a micrometer. I won't give you any trouble. I won't hold you back." He could tell they were tempted. This class hadn't given them as many opportunities to fully use their powers as they'd had during duels. "At least one of us should stay here with Dash," Fabri said. "Here," said Soren, typing quickly before they could argue. "Have fun being real avowed." Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. Alden stood in a huddle with his team, waiting for responses to come in. Nearby, Max was having a quiet discussion with his own teammates. They were going to be the bait, since Klein owed them an attack. As soon as they got a certain distance out onto the floor, the instructor and Omega Scorpio should come for them, and they needed to be on the same page about what they were going to do when that happened. Getting this attempt completely organized in the next 90 seconds or so is ridiculous, thought Alden, but at least it doesn't leave a lot of room for people to argue. He craned his neck to see what was happening on the floor. A couple of teams were being way too obvious about the fact that they'd just been invited to join a scheme, but maybe Klein wouldn't notice with Medi currently screaming and swinging what might have been a curtain rod at him. The first message notification appeared on Alden's interface, and more rapidly followed. "Heloisa, yes. Reinhard, where do I shoot from? Marcia, I'll be attacking from the west. 2 slashes as I run in. As many as possible when I finally get there. Reinhard, I've been saving up a big one. Marcia, I'm not dodging any of you. I don't know about this." Lexi was standing to Alden's left, whispering at the others on their team. "What if Heather hits all the wrong people? Hoyu or Everly might be better. If you destroy our classmates instead of the instructor, I'll give you my stipend next month," said Khan. "Because it will be funny for years to come. But publicly, I'll disown you. It's not funny." "You'll be fine," said Alden, frowning as Marcia added a text specifying which of Klein's body parts the first 2 slashes would be aimed at. "Is that a useful thing for the others to know? I guess it's not unhelpful. And we have to donate our best defense to the fight since we're organizing." "That's you." He wanted to say more, but some of these people needed replies. With the instigator of the plot busy and no time left, Alden decided to come up with his own answers. "Alden, all first attacks should arrive the second Klein reaches Max's team. We don't want him to be able to respond to them one at a time, so you guys need to try to hit from multiple directions simultaneously. I guess Marcia is coming from the west, which is toward the front entrance. Heloisa, you might want to start moving as soon as you see Max's team heading back onto the floor so you don't end up behind. Winston, I'll help of course. Even if nobody else has been willing to help my team all class." "What's he talking about?" asked Lexi. "Did he ask for help with something?" "All I ever heard him complaining about was weights," said Alden. "He thought his team deserved to have some at the start. But there's a ton of heavy stuff on the floor now, and we're all in the same position. It's not like he got behind because of it. Never mind. Can't talk. Winston, if it looks good, I'll feature you all on my channel. Siren, all of my team is coming except for me." Alden's eyebrows shot up. "Wow," said Hoyu. "That will help. We don't want so many people that they get in each other's way, but that's significant added firepower." "Medi's down," said Everly. "His team is just standing around. Why are they so useless? Should I go get him since he's part of the plan? Marcia, I'll focus on low shots. Let the archer and Tayet take high ones. Don't bother dodging me, Shrike. Alden, if someone dies during the attack, our team will drag them over the starting line to fix their suit, so don't hesitate to go for it with everything you've got. I'll grab Medi," Hoyu was telling Everly. "One of your ice patches will put everyone else at a disadvantage if Klein decides to run toward it. He'll go aerial, and they'll skid around." He ran onto the floor. "We're on corpse duty?" Khan asked. He was still holding his bicycle. "Did you just decide that spontaneously, Alden?" "But why can't I help, too?" Astrid was asking Max. Everyone was talking over each other. Alden hoped his own teammates didn't mind about the corpse duty. It seemed like something somebody needed to volunteer for. Letting one of the chosen fighters die half a gym or more away from their team without offering any help would be a horrible thing to do, and he was feeling as responsible for this plan as he could, given the fact that he was still surprised it was happening. "Reinhard, I have a name. It's not just Archer." "Alden, sounds good," Marcia. Sounds great, Siren. Here are your maps, everybody. Good luck. I think Galacourse is about done with this cycle. Time to go. Max looked back at Alden. Are you ready? Alden blinked. I'm just making this up as I go along. I'm ready to do more of that. Max nodded. See you at the end of class. He leaped onto Jeffy's back, Astrid hopped onto Lucille's, and his team strolled through the barrier onto the floor. So it's about to start. Just like this. Max will try to time their forward pushes to drag Klein in at exactly the moment Galacourse stops. What do I take care of from here? He confirmed that his shield was in good shape, grabbed his large zip bag full of dirt and pried it open with his teeth, checked on Hoyu's return progress with a stiff-suited Medi. Okay. Beside him, Lexi was breathing so hard Alden could feel it on his face. The pressure had to be bad. Lexi wasn't back in his groove within their own team, and that was with them all reassuring him that mistakes with his unruly death whip didn't bother them. Being a part of an unanticipated battle that was important to the whole class. If only one person screws up, everyone's going to blame them. Hey, Lexi, said Alden, I wasn't going to mention this until we were at the spa later, because I'm not 100% sure and I wanted to check the footage. You guys are going to the sauna again? That's where you and Hoyu go after every class? Alden talked over Kun and Everly. I think you might have hurt one of Instructor Klein's hands earlier. With rather. Lexi frowned at him. I'm serious. He's only been using one hand all class. It might be on purpose just to rile us up or give himself a challenge, but I noticed it after that first attack on us, and it hasn't changed. Maybe you chopped off all his fingers or something. I would know if I'd. You were trying hard to hit the instructor then, Everly pointed out. Very hard. Lexi reddened. You don't have time to be embarrassed, Alden said. I just wanted you to know I think you might already have dealt the biggest blow to Klein of anyone here today. So. Just go do it again, right? He lifted their shield and stepped onto the floor with the others behind him. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. As far as how many teams we expect to succeed, Torsten said in response to a question Hale had just asked, there's no set number. If some of them manage to put together a group that breezes through us all today, we might consider a more advanced challenge for them on Friday, but I don't imagine that will happen. We have the usual mix of strong personalities and new avowed foibles in this class. Some of them still think they're on their way to being invincible. A few are so nervous about their own strength that they can't use it properly. Every single one of them had the ambition to try for this, and when that ambition meets a challenging reality, they respond in so many unpredictable ways. Teamwork isn't easy, especially under those conditions. Aparna spoke from her desk by the window. Maybe they'll surprise us. I wouldn't mind that, Torsten said with a nod. I'd like it even more if some of them surprised themselves. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. So far, being a high rank was almost exactly like Ignacio's parents and grandparents had told him it would be. He had plenty of examples in his family, and he'd had a lifetime to know it was probably coming. The things that surprised him weren't small to him, but they were small enough that his older relatives hadn't thought to warn him about them. Like the way so many adults looked at him and listened to him when he wore his rank on his name tag, as if he were a more respectable person than he'd been just 3 months ago. How his slightly enhanced vision made those looks stand out. The profound thrill and loss he'd felt after throwing a knife for the first time as an avowed and having it sink up to the hilt in a practice target he'd struggled to hit the day before. His life had been split like the target, like his family had said it would be, like every avowed's was. He'd gotten in a little throwing practice before his bedtime one night. Then he woke up hours later, having been selected for the duty that 2 species had decided before his birth would be his. Ignacio had made a pre-affixation bucket list, but in the end, he had only taken care of what he'd thought at the time were the most important wishes on it. He'd hugged all the people he loved with his full strength, he'd played a round of every sport he enjoyed with his friends, and he'd had sex. A neighbor a year older than him had put the same item on her own list of things she wanted to try out before she received her powers, He was still worried completing that last one as if it was a chore, with a casual acquaintance, hadn't been the best choice for him. It was a more enjoyable than not education, but it really hadn't lived up to the romantic scenarios in his imagination. And maybe it was a small part of the reason he had affixed and applied to school without finishing the whole list. Around that time, a long goodbye to his ordinary humanity had started to be more depressing than fun, and Ignacio had decided to look forward instead. And now I'm here. And I'm this. The wind had just stopped. They were already moving together, him, Fabri, Tayet, and Vandy, and it was like playing football with his friends on that last day before he affixed. The same rush, the same worry about letting the team down, the same focus on a goal. Running was deceptive. His highest speed strained him in exactly the same way a sprint always had. It felt so similar to his mind and his muscles, and yet stationary objects flew past faster. People who said they were the same person before and after becoming avowed. Maybe they were better than Ignacio somehow. He wondered about that every now and then. Mostly, he thought they were fake for trying to pretend they were too humble for the changes to really change them. The body you inhabited and the things you could do with it affected who you were, didn't they? Your first affixation didn't make you a better or worse person, but it definitely made you different. Be careful shaking people's hands. Learn to pay attention to how you move through crowds. Accept the fact that everyone on Earth has an opinion about how avowed should use their powers, and every avowed on Enzadora has one about how S's should behave. Throw knives in the Chilean North High Gym. So many sharp things around right now. I'll take them all. He threw one of his knives to the right, past Fabri's back. Then he activated the leading knife skill with a whisper. He was trying to break the habit of that unnecessary whisper, but right now, he couldn't afford to think about it. He let his weapon zip over a pile of debris, then recalled it. He liked the way his Meister weapons occupied their own special place in his attention. With his eyes closed, he still would have known which direction his knife was coming from. Wrapping his hand around the hilt was so natural. Throw it again before the following shards of metal, splinters of wood, and knives catch up. Keep them all in the air. Ignacio had decided he would be a Meister 3 years ago. He still remembered the first time he had answered someone too seriously when they asked him what he wanted to be one day. You were supposed to say a superhero. Or a celebrity. A politician or an athlete. You weren't supposed to say what Ignacio had picked up from some of his relatives. If I'm destined to be a machine of war, then I will try to be an excellent one. The Artonans weren't creating so many combat-capable avowed on a whim. They were doing it, as they'd always said, because Earth or the true planets might one day need them. All the people who thought they could ignore that or avoid it were just thinking in the short term and hiding their heads in the sand. Strong avowed were valuable. Eventually, valuable resources got used. That was what Ignacio's family believed. Maybe it wouldn't be for a long time. 50 years. 100. Ignacio still planned to be alive then. But maybe for 100 years, I get to be a superhero. And have a lot of fun with these new classmates of mine. Vandy's arms were up. Fabri had run ahead, trying to time his arrival to match the other close-ranged fighters. Tayet's expression had shifted to that serious one she always wore when she threw. Instructor Klein had just reached Jeffy's team. I'll help cut off his chance of escaping into the air. The swarm that followed his blade was so thick that Klein would be lucky to fit a single hand between the shards. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. Tayet was tired, and she felt ungrounded. It had been the same ever since that horrible night. She wished she could go back to the first week of school again, getting away from the stressors at home, feeling grown up with Vandy and Everly in their new apartment. She had been stunned that she had made it into school with them when so many of the others had been cut, even though she had known that the class, and all the practice she'd done should help. A few days after they'd moved in, they'd been laughing together, painting each other's nails, and trying to get to know Maricel. Having a new friend their age who didn't know anything about Enzadora was exciting. For some reason, Maricel hadn't explored much at all during her months in intake, so they had a list as long as the span of everything she needed to see and do. Now, a third of that list was ruined by the floods, and Maricel was gone all the time. A lot of it was publicity or working with Fragment, but Tayet thought she was also training in private. Or she was just avoiding the apartment. Last night, Tayet had gone to visit the members of her family who were staying at her older sister's place. She'd gotten back to campus late and had decided to wait up to see Maricel when she came in. But if her roommate had returned at all, it must have been sometime after 2 o'clock in the morning, when Tayet fell asleep on the sofa, and before 6, when she woke up thanks to a vague nightmare and a text message from her brother about the nightmare. She was supposed to tell on him when he read her mind. But he couldn't help himself, and if she told on him, they'd just rush their plans to stick him on a new residential ship even farther out at sea, where he couldn't check on the people he worried about when the panic was bad for him. Right now, as uncomfortable as things were for everyone else, they were better for him. The government was quietly grateful to him. He was being allowed to spend time in Apex. The family had all eaten breakfast together one morning, and he'd made them coffee. And the Artonan general, the female one, had come to see him twice. She had thanked him. He'd been going through a difficult spell, listening hard and far, as usual, when he picked up the sound of one of the mines on the submerged boat. He was the reason the system had known the attack was going to happen just before it did. It was hard to say what those extra seconds had bought, but Tayet knew they must have bought something. Someone's life. Someone's home. He finally gets to be the hero he always wanted to be. And he doesn't get any credit for it. His choice, her parents' choice, and the government's. Unfair. Practical. Telling Isidora her brother had helped save them like that would make a few people accepting of him, maybe, but it would make a lot more angry. It was the same reason Tayet didn't tell when he randomly texted her things like, "What are you scared of? Don't think such unkind thoughts about yourself." Or, "That person is lying to you. Stay away from them. Go home. Can't I help? Watch out. Do you need me? Do you need me, Tayet? If you need me, I'll be there as fast as I can." Nobody wanted to hear that a Sway who'd taken severe mind damage on one of his first ever jobs was quietly growing more and more powerful just offshore. Nobody wanted to believe that all he ever did was watch over the island and worry about the people he loved. Nobody wanted a superhero like that. And they never would. So they would get his little sister instead. She wouldn't be as good. She knew that. He'd been charming and gentle, and even as a Sway, he'd been welcomed with open arms by the populace of a small city with a serious crime problem. The idea of being famous made Tayet so nervous she wanted to throw up, and the thought of everyone judging her performance and talking about her all the time made her feel like she needed resuscitation. But she was going to become a superhero. She was believing it more every day. She could feel it in the way her hands went steady when she plucked a dart from her gym case, the way her thoughts cleared when she selected her spell. Shrike's leading knife wouldn't be a problem. Her darts never followed it. She ran nearly as fast as an A-rank speedster her age. She left all her anxiety behind her. When she decided on a target, when she fixed her eyes on it, it never quite looked like what it was. It wasn't Torsten Klein, breaking Max's leg and twisting away from Lucille's grab. Instead, it was the unregistered Sway who'd tortured her brother's mind, faceless, cruel, and still at large. She was going to find that person, that unregistered who must be so terrifyingly powerful to have ripped into a trained S-rank like that. And whoever they were, wherever they were, she wasn't even going to give them the chance to see her coming. No heroic speeches for a camera, no appeals to their humanity and offers of forgiveness if they came to Isidora with her peacefully. One day, she was just going to be there in the shadows where they were hiding, and before they could blink, quicker than they could think, Tayet was going to bury every dart she had in their brain. Her arm moved like a whip. The first one flew. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. It was happening. Alden and Everly were crouching with his shield over their heads. They were trying to reduce their damageable surface area while still keeping good visibility and remaining mobile. Con had just split off from them. He was running forward and to the right across a thin scattering of dirt. Alden had flung his whole bag full in the direction of Max's team just to give himself a very small, very temporary patch of ground to work with now that all hell was about to break loose. Con had said he was getting a little closer for corpse duty. Alden was sure he just wanted to find an opening to throw the broken bicycle at their instructor. He was also sure that this meant he and Everly were going to end up corpse dutying Con back to the starting line in about 10 seconds. But, you know, good for him for trying. Jim has been so busy for the rest of us today, and he didn't get to do much. Spiking a bike into Klein's face is a noble goal. There was a moment of something that sounded like quiet even though it wasn't. No wind, just pounding feet as several teams dashed for the finish while the chosen people raced toward Alden and Everly's position, and to the fight. Reinhard was drawing his bow. Marcia's glaive was starting its first swipe. Alden wished he could see all of it at once so that he could admire the way the spur-of-the-moment attack came together from so many directions. It was going to be lethal to a lot of the wrong people. That was unavoidable under the circumstances. Kill Klein no matter the cost wasn't the kind of plan that would leave the attackers unscathed. But he was still so impressed seeing them move. Fibra looked like Klein himself, ducking under Marcia's first magical strike, sliding across the floor beneath her other to spring up toward the instructor's face. And at the same time, the ranged weapons were arriving. One of Shrike's knives had picked up what must have been everything sharper than a thumbtack on its way in. It was dragging a spherical cloud of pointy danger in its wake. Heloisa was throwing what was left of the washing machine. Maddie was flying over Alden's head. Flying. Yes, flying. He'd been hurled by Hoyu from back at the starting line. Alden didn't have space to wonder if that was a mutual decision, or if Hoyu was adding some pizzazz of his own to the event. Klein was already taking the washing machine on the shoulder, dodging Fabry, swiping Maddie the missile out of the air with a leg. Nope, Maddie was grabbing onto the leg. Maddie was flying off the leg. Maddie was catching himself against the floor with just his hands and redirecting his body back into the fray. The Gendarmes had already plucked Max and Lucille from the madness. Alden watched them both jump high to avoid rudder, which was awfully rigid. Everyone, including Klein, was just kind of limboing under it or hopping over it. Lexi, thought Alden. Come on. Do it like you were earlier. So fast I can't even see it. That's what we really need. Con was almost. A hand slapped Alden's arm. Snake. Everly's voice was urgent. Snake, Snake. Whose turn is it? At the other end of the gym, Instructor Waker was lifting some kind of heavy metal cage that could possibly have been a dog crate. For a very large, strong dog. Whose turn? Thought Alden. Oh. It might be. Then, before he could finish realizing that the dog crate would probably be flying toward one of his own teammates, a person crossed his line of sight. The person was very fast, and he was way out there, a few paces beyond the 3/4 mark. Why the hell is Winston all the way up there instead of back here with us? Briefly, Alden's eyes flicked away from Big Snake in the cage, following the direction of Winston's run. The speedster wasn't aiming for the finish line. There was nothing in the direction he was heading except for Sauron, lying on the floor between the barrier and a sandbag. That piece of shit. He wanted to be mad about it. To fix it. But his team's fight was here, and he didn't have the attention to spare. Tope continued,